702.
The Big Interview
With Bongani Bingwa.
We've got some tough questions to answer as a country. Who have we become that a bounty on the head of an institution of higher learning can be the norm? Do you remember 5 million rand was the price on the head of the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Fort Hare? Last week, the campus was literally on fire following protests there. How much of all of this has to do with efforts by that institution to root out corruption? We have seen vested interests oppose those kinds of moves before, and it's one I think we cannot turn away from. We've invited Professor Andries Bezuidenhout, who's written a really thoughtful piece about what is happening at Fort Hare University, and we thought he'd explain it. He's a professor of development studies at the university's Department of Sociology, Anthropology and Development. Professor Bezuidenhout, thank you so much for your time and welcome to 702 Breakfast.
Thank you, Bongani. Good morning, and I'd be happy if we do first names. It's Andries.
Andries, that's fine by me. Andries, firstly, we haven't spoken to Professor Buhlungu in quite a while. I'm suspecting he's no longer giving interviews. How is he, and is he in good shape? Is he in good nick?
I think he went through a really tough time. He was, what I understand is he was quite devastated, and this is what he's written, that he was physically ill after these arson attacks on both the Alice and the East London campuses. But I see he's back in fighting spirit, and I'm quite relieved. He's done an interesting interview in the Daily Maverick, where he put his version of events on the record. And I think the Vice Chancellor with the spine of steel is back in the public domain.
Indeed. My regards to him when you see him next. Let's talk about how the University of Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo, Govan Mbeki, Robert Sobukwe, Mangosuthu Buthelezi, many other luminaries on the continent has got to this. In your piece, you speak about how when you arrived, there was hardly a functioning toilet. Just explain the state of the institution you found.
Okay, so I joined the University of Fort Hare 8 years ago, and I should mention that I joined the university because of Professor Buhlungu. I worked with him as a colleague at both the universities of Pretoria and the University of the Witwatersrand. So I knew him from there, and I wanted to support the project. When I joined the campus, I was really struck by how dilapidated it was and how little money was spent on upkeep. The place really was a mess, and at times it was really difficult. I mean, it's a banal example to give, but it was really hard to find a functioning toilet. When I walked into my teaching venue the first time, there was no furniture. And I was told someone had left the door open over the December break, and students had taken the tables and the chairs to their residence rooms. They were, and the word they used is squat. They were squatting 4 to 5 students to a room because there weren't enough residence rooms. There were torn and tattered curtains from the 1970s on the windows, and I really didn't feel that it was a dignified space for students to learn in. So I think what I observed and what I think the key issue was is that the contracts the university had signed with service providers weren't to the benefit of the university. A lot of people were making a lot of money off the university, but that money wasn't going to the project it was supposed to support, and that is giving our students a decent chance to study. A lot of that has changed, and now, Bongani, you can think people were making millions out of this institution and not doing much for it. And the pushback started immediately. Professor Buhlungu's inaugural as Vice-Chancellor of the university was disrupted in a disgraceful way. One of the first things he did was to build new student residences. The situation is already better. We also built a brand new student clinic There were new laboratories, so it takes a long time when the wheels are oiled by corruption and you stop the corruption, all the wheels stop. So it's difficult to get things going then on a basis of proper governance. But those changes were starting to kick in. It's amazing how the campus has picked up. Simple things like wheelchair access to buildings is getting done. My teaching venue is lovely now. It's a wonderful new classical building, and it's been renovated. So the gardens look beautiful. So from where I stand, the university is really on an upward trajectory.
So let me ask you this then, Andries, because some of the protesters, some of the students claimed all sorts of things, including feeling unsafe on campus. They claim corruption continues at that university. They claim, for example, that they don't always learn in dignified conditions. How is it that outside or external forces would use students who are benefiting in the way you describe to go as far as what we have seen last week in those arson attacks?
Yeah, there's a context here, Bongani. And first of all, I have to say that students often have legitimate gripes. They do. Our campus is still not where it should be. After decades of neglect, we are definitely not where where the privileged universities are. So when our students talk about a lack of dignity, they do have a point. So I fully agree with them there. But what we've seen is an upward trajectory from where things were. They were much worse, and I think the newer students are maybe not aware of how bad things were, and they might not see that upward trajectory. We've had two terrible incidents on campus recently, and we're all emotional about that. One of my students in my honors class, Yonela Magawule, died on campus, and it was a murder after a student bash. And there's another, a recent suicide that happened, seemingly a suicide. And these are all, it makes us all feel very unsafe and worried about this, but there are investigations that are ongoing.
Yeah.
What I do find reprehensible, though, is that such incidents, such tragic incidents, are cynically used by political forces. And here I refer to both student and external forces. We do have eyewitness accounts of external influence. The university is formally written to the government about the involvement of a local councillor. Local elections are coming up. But also there's a disgraced former SRC president who's key in all of this, who pleaded guilty to a gender-based violence incident, for example, and who constantly misrepresents matters in formal letters to the government. So we also have a fight over a disgraced former SRC president that's part of this.
All right.
Part of the mix.
Those internal dynamics notwithstanding, have you received the support that you need?
I don't think we have. What really worries me is this. If you want to sustain an upward trajectory, if you want to maintain a project of rooting out corruption, and I'm sure there still is corruption. Again, you don't have decades of corruption. Mcebisi Jonas spoke about the de-Bantustanization, the need for de-Bantustanization. In the Eastern Cape, a lot of the old-style Ciskei and Transkei politics, the kind of corruption we had in those days reinvented itself in a new context. I'm astounded when I drive past Bishu and I see there's a brand new street called Independence Avenue. And our provincial government has a building called State House, as if the Bishu massacre never happened. So what really worries me is how these old-style corrupt politics from the Ciskei and Transkei times are still with us. And these are the kinds of practices. They're not new practices. They're deeply entrenched and deeply embedded. And they stay embedded when you have chaos.
It's a fight for the life of Fort Hare, isn't it?
It is. And what we
survival.
Want, precisely, Bongani, what we want is an orderly, systematic handover from this vice-chancellor to the next. And what we need is a good process, and a process where we will appoint an academic, a seasoned academic, rather than a political player, who understands what a university is all about, so that we can solidify these changes for the benefit of our poor students. 95% of our students are on NSFAS. The politicians and the elite's children don't come to us. They go to the elite universities, and there's big drama when things are disrupted there, but seemingly us rural universities don't seem to matter. There was an assassination at Walter Sisulu University recently. How much do we talk of, it's a deputy vice chancellor. Is that discussed in the national domain? So for us on the margins of society, and I'm so grateful that you're giving this airtime, we need the whole country to swing in behind us and to say that arson and violence is not necessary. It seems like crazy. It seems like, why would students burn their own university? But for political players, this is deeply rational. Chaos is rational because you stop an orderly handover of an institution that's clamping down on corruption. Wow. And that's what this is about.
All right. Appreciate your time. Professor Andries Bezuidenhout, Professor there of Development Studies at the University of Fort Hare. I started this interview by saying we need to ask ourselves a tough question. A 5 million rand bounty on the head of an institution, and of course, as he just reminded us there, a deputy vice chancellor assassinated. Who are we?
Current events, developing stories,
tough questions.
Your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.